Good morning. It's nice to see you all here on this Sunday morning. First of all, I want to say Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. And then Happy Solstice to everyone. So today is the longest day of the year. It's either going to be the longest day of the year or the longest day of the year, so hopefully it'll be the first one for you. Anyhow, it's nice to see you all here. It's, I guess, the first day of summer then. Does it feel like it? It feels like summer's been going on for a while. And along with summers, at least for me, come summer walks. I walk all year round. I just love to walk. But there's something about walking in the summer that's a little different from walking in the winter. Winter will have some bite to it. Sometimes it'll maybe put a little bit of speed into your walk. But summer walks have a different quality. And I was just up at on the Gunflint Trail, which for those of you who don't know Minnesota, and even those of you who do know Minnesota, that's way up in northern Minnesota. In fact, at some point, the cabin that my husband and I had rented, our phones did not know what country we were in. It would say, "Welcome to Canada." So it's that far north. And while we were there, we did some canoeing and we did some hiking, just taking some walks. And there's a quality that I realized as we were taking these walks that they have. So the first walk that we went on was named after a large lake that's up there. So it was the South Lake Trail. That's what it was called. But when we were checking in with an outfitter just to get a map for the area, he pulled up the weather just to kind of see. And that's another trick up there if you know that part of the state. There aren't any towns. And so if you're trying to figure out what the weather might be like, good luck, because they'll give you a town that's on the lake, and the lake has slightly different weather than where we were. Or you try to find a town that's kind of nearby. Ely might be one that we try. But this guy just pulled up a map, and then he took the cursor and he pointed it right at where we were. And then he got a weather prediction for that. And he said, "Oh, there's going to be a storm coming in at about 2 o'clock, so you probably don't want to be out for that." And we were like, well, yeah, storm and being out in the woods didn't sound so great. So we went out on the trail, and we had 2 routes we could go. So we're on the South Lake Trail, so there's a seeming goal to it, but this is something about summer walks where they have goals, but the goals aren't really the goal of the walk, right? And so you could go to a different lake. And we thought, we'll just go to that different lake. It's closer, and we only have so much time because the storm is coming. And we walked in that trail for a while until the trail seemed to stop being a trail. And then we looked and we looked, and we thought, well, knowing us, we just stepped off the wrong direction at some point, because those trails can be a little, take some acute observation. So we walked back to where the trails had split, and then we walked back out to where we were, and we realized, no, that was the trail. And it was going to be really hard to traverse. And you could almost see, based on what the landscape looked like, how much time it was going to take us to get to the other side. But as far as you could see, and it was probably going to be we'd get to where we could see all this stuff was going to end, and then the storm would come. So we just went, we'll go the other direction. So we went the other direction, which also appeared like the trail was going to disappear into a creek. But we just walked through the creek for a little bit, and then there was the trail. And we walked on that until it was time to turn around. And then we turned around, and we went back to our cabin, and the storm never hit. So, but you don't want to be out there in a storm. So that was the walk. And the next time that we went on a longer hike was on our trip back. So we're driving back now to the Twin Cities from the Gunflint Trail. We decided we hadn't been to Eagle Mountain in a while. If you know Eagle Mountain, it's the highest point in Minnesota. 2,310 feet, I know. That's what the marker says at the summit. We bumped into somebody who was coming down from the summit, and he was describing the path. He goes, well, yeah, he goes, you're going to get to this place where it's really beautiful, this gorgeous view. He goes, that's not the summit. He said, and the summit is marked by, he said, there's a rotting log that's pointing you toward where the summit is and telling you where not to go. So we kind of had our eye open for that rotting log. And what we decided, we looked at the time, then we arrived at the trail, and we just went, well, we may get to the summit, we may not get to the summit, but we can't stay out too late. So we're just going to, walk as far as we can and then just turn around and walk back to the car. And obviously I got to the summit because we got our picture taken at the markers. We bumped into some young hikers and they're like, oh, do you want your picture taken? We're like, why not? And again, the getting to the summit really wasn't the point. It was kind of a goal because that's the trail. And if we could get there, we could get there. And if we couldn't, we couldn't. Because what it was about was just being right there walking. That's what it's about. It's just walking. And that is the summit in a manner of speaking. You get the summit just by walking. And boy, did we have a summit experience just walking on that Eagle Mountain Trail, because we were kind of walking our way down, and then my husband suddenly turned around and he zoomed back up the trail, and I could tell something was up because I could hear something rustling in brush that I couldn't see. And I thought it was a bear, so I just said, slow down, don't run like that. But then it came out and it was a moose cow coming right out within 15 feet of me. And I went, oh my God. So then she looked at us and she was pretty alert. And she moved a little bit up the trail, but she kept watching us and grunting. And I went, I don't think that's good. So we kind of walked back up the other direction. And then she walked back down the trail where she had come from, and she came back with a calf. And I went, oh, we better walk a little bit further back from that. So we walked a little bit further back, and she kept watching us very well. She could have just stampeded down that trail, and we would have dove into whatever, but, it was that close an encounter. And then she turned around with her calf, and they walked up the trail the opposite direction. So there you go. That's what the hike was. Right, that marker at the top, that wasn't what this was about. This was the summit being right there as we're walking. And so as I'm thinking about this, I'm experiencing that actually. It wasn't when I was thinking, it was experiencing. And it was only later that I was thinking about the summit and summer walking and all of that. And I thought there's a lot, you really see if you open your eyes up how our practice is not just sitting on a cushion, right? It's just a reminder that our practice is living life. It's what we're doing in the world at every moment is practice, or at least the opportunity to practice. And that trail that we were on, the Eagle Mountain Trail, gives you opportunity to reflect on that. So this I did reflect on because the trail is strewn with rocks and roots. You have to pay attention. And then I started realizing there were ways that you could pay attention. And there was the one way where you kind of go, well, when you're calculating which rock to jump on or walk up or avoid, or, you're doing all of that kind of stuff. And then sometimes you're wrong, and so then you thought if you stepped on that rock, that was going to be good, and then you step on the next rock and you lose your balance, or, so it's constant calculation, and it's kind of exhausting. But there actually is a point, and I think people who've done hiking like this have experienced this, or if you've, when we were in the Boundary Waters last year, my husband and I were portaging, I had this same experience where you kind of stop calculating. And you just start walking. And you do it with awareness. You don't just do it with in oblivion. You are paying attention. And then it becomes less arduous. It's still work because you're going up and it's rocky and it's rooty, but it has a different quality to it. And I had thought, as I was thinking about talking about this stuff today, that I had read a book a number of years ago that I'd shared with the Sangha called The Philosophy of Walking, and I thought I should see what Frederick Gross, the author of that novel, or that treatise, has to say. And he does write about this aspect of walking that I was talking about. I was kind of surprised that I was like, this is what I'm talking about. This is the thing. He says, one might almost say that a good walker glides. So when you're walking and you're doing it in a way that is in tune with the trail, in a manner of speaking, you're gliding. But he says a bad walker may sometimes go fast, accelerate, then slow down. And all that sounded familiar to me, right? He said his movements are jerky, his legs form clumsy angles, his speed will be made of sudden accelerations, followed by heavy breathing, large voluntary movements, a new decision every time the body is pushed or pulled, a red, perspiring face. So that's a bad walker. That's a person who's just working too hard. The good walker is just gliding along. And there's just kind of an awareness of what's going on. So when I found that passage by Frederick Gross, I thought, well, maybe I'll talk about a philosophy of walking. It's a great book, and it has a lot of overlap or a lot of resonance with Buddhist practice. And then I thought, I can make this even better. I take my favorite writer, one of my favorite writers anyhow, Robert Walser, who's a Swiss writer for whom walking was what he did, it's what he wrote about. Just constantly was reading about walks that he would go on. I thought, well, he's the poet laureate of walking. There must be something in a philosophy of walking about Robert Walser, and we'll talk about that. And Robert Walser definitely has this resonance with the Buddhist teachings. So I kind of looked around in a philosophy of walking, and I wasn't seeing anything, and I was a little surprised. So I went to our handy friend Google, and I typed in Robert Walser and Frederick Gross to see if there was a connection between them. And it took me a while. AI told me, yep, there's a chapter devoted to Robert Walser. And I went, where? And I'm looking through the table of contents, and every chapter tells you what author, if he's going to talk about an author, what author he's talking about. And Robert Walser was not one of them. And I went, I don't get it. So then I said, well, what chapter is it in? And it told me exactly what chapter it was in. So I went to that chapter, and I went through the whole chapter, and his name did not appear. So I went back to AI, and I went, I don't remember what else I typed in. I just tried getting more and more specific, and finally it said, Robert Walser is not actually mentioned in a philosophy of walking. So I spent like 20 minutes looking for this, and I decided, you know what, instead, I'll see if there's a Robert Walser story that I can share with you. And the first story I looked at is that story. So it's about walking. It's about walking as practice. It's about our practice. It's about what I was experiencing when I was going out on walks on the Gunflint Trail. So I just thought I'd share with you. It's such a delightful story. So I'll read snippets from it. I'm going to read the whole story, but I'll just read little passages and then just talk about what he's saying, just to bring us back to the practice. The story is The Mountain, and it was written in 1914. And the thing about Walser's stories is they're not very typical stories. They usually don't have characters, except either Robert Walser or somebody who's unnamed, but we would guess, or you, which this one is, right? So he doesn't really write about characters, and there's not plots. This is just somebody walking up a mountain. That's really all it is. So here he is. He says, without subjecting yourself to a certain amount of physical exertion, you will not, of course, reach the top of the beautiful mountain. And yet, I feel you will not shy away from the task of climbing. There you go. So the first thing is, without subjecting yourself to a certain amount of physical exertion, you will not reach the top of the beautiful mountain. And then he says, but I feel you will not shy away from the task of climbing. This will not be daunting to you. So the first thing I looked at that top of the mountain, right? He said it takes some exertion to get to the top of the mountain. And there's something about those mountaintops. In the imagery of Buddhism, for example, you'll see these mountaintops as a place where the whole picture can be seen, right? That's the summit. That's where we're not caught up in the details of this world and we get lost, right? That moose that I didn't see at first until she rounded that corner, occluded by the this and that of the daily world. When you're on the summit, you're, in a way, up above it, above the clutter. And you can see the whole picture. But even though you're up above it, you're not out of it. See, being on the mountaintop is still of the world. Right? It's just not lost in the world. So he describes that top of the mountain as the beautiful mountain. The top of the beautiful mountain. Right? If we can realize reality, we can realize the beauty of this world that we live in. And then, as he says, we have to make an effort. The thing about that mountaintop, as I was saying when I was describing going to the top of Eagle Mountain, that summit, that mountaintop is always right here. It's always right here. But it requires some exertion. And the exertion that we make is because we know that the mountaintop is right here. But we lose track of it. We lose sight of it. So as Robert Balser says, I know that even though this requires some exertion, you're still going to want to do it because you know what it is that you're losing sight of. You know that in your heart. When I started this practice, I remember Steve Hagen telling us, you all want to wake up. That's what you want to do. And I remember thinking, well, who says? I don't know, that's what I want to do. But when you realize what that teaching is pointing out, you realize that is what we want. We do all kinds of things and tell ourselves all kinds of stuff about what it is we're doing. But what we really want to do is wake up. And if you realize that, then you make that effort. Balser continues, he says, it is a bright, warm, even hot, cheerful early morning, perhaps late morning, in summer and the world. As far as you can see consists of a lake and a river, a haze of blue and green. Oftentimes, you stop and stand for a while to catch your breath, wipe the sweat from your brow, and look down into the valley. I just love the way he's setting the day, right? It is, it's not a specific day. You can see that's a bright, warm, even hot, cheerful early morning, perhaps late morning, in summer and the world. That is just such a beautiful way to put the experience that he's describing. And it's all lake and river, a haze of blue and green. That's the whole world. That's this whole morning. That's this whole season right there. Lake and river, blue and green, stopping and catching your breath. That's the whole world. That's the whole summer, right? That's the whole morning. Stopping and catching your breath, mopping your brow, and looking down into the valley. That's the whole world. What is right before us? It's the whole season. It's the whole time right there. And then he does something kind of surprising. He says, and now you will permit me to imagine that you have arrived happy and merry on the soft, green, broad mountain ridge where the cool, pure mountain air at once swirls around you, which you breathe in with delight so that your lungs expand and your heart too. And the surprising thing is just that little, he goes, now you'll permit me to imagine that you've already arrived at the summit. And I think that little moment, that elision, is really important. Because he realizes already what he's been describing is how we are getting to the summit is the arriving there. You don't have to write about getting to the summit. It's already there in the rivers and lakes. It's already there in stopping to mop your brow. It's right there. And once you get there, then he starts to talk about the beautiful quality that has, green with cool mountain air that swirls around you, and it brings delight. Right? So we hear about this practice, the realization of our practice is joy or happiness, you'll hear sometimes. That's realizing the true nature of reality. That's having that insight. It's compassion. So, on one hand, by just imagining that we're at the mountaintop, he's pointing to the fact that it's right here, right? The other thing that he's doing is he's not trying to tell us how to get there at all. He's not describing. He's just imagining now being at the mountaintop. He's actually doing what it is that any text will do, which is it's just imagining for us. Anytime you start writing, that's what's going on, especially as you start creating pictures like he does. But it's this place where it's delightful and it expands one's heart. That's the last thing that he says there. It expands one's heart. He says, standing on the heights you have ascended feels divinely beautiful to you, dear friend. Dear friend, you've made it. You're a dear friend, and you're in these divinely beautiful place. And you feel about to drown in the enjoyment of this sweet, high mountain freedom, exactly as though drowned in the sea of delicious air and the sea of the joy of the mountain climber. That is how you seem to yourself. Right? So, standing on these heights where you are, that's so divinely beautiful. He says it's as if you're drowning. And it's in drowning in the sea of the delicious air. So again, that tactile experience that we have, but also in the joy of the mountain climber. Not of the summit reacher, but of the mountain climber. The joy of that. And that drowning to me, I feel like there's an immersion in that, right? That image of drowning. But that is one that we could say leaves the self behind. Like that self is dead at that moment. And instead there's just this life, this beauty. He says, you feel blessed to be able to look down at the world lying at your feet like a bright and jolly painting down there, and resounding and smelling like a song, like a poem, like a mirage. So like I said, this summit is, in a way, you see the whole picture. It's not lost in the world, but the world's not lost to it. It's still part of the world. And what's interesting is he realizes the illusory nature of that world. So all the images that he uses, he says, you look down at that world lying at your feet like a bright and jolly painting. And that illusory nature that he discovers, it's not terrifying to him. He doesn't go, oh my God, my life's been illusory. What have I been doing? But instead there's something joyful about it. It's bright, it's beautiful, right? He goes on and he says it's this bright and jolly painting, but he also says it's like a song, it's like a poem, it's like a mirage. That brings great joy to us to realize that that's what this world is like. Slowly, he says, you walk on through the pasture, under fir branches and charming beech leaves, which smile at you with their fresh, godlike color as though with a child's smile. I mean, just look at that. This is the way that you're seeing the world reflects right back to you. Because that is the nature of the world, right? Last night, my mother-in-law asked when she was going back to her apartment that she does not like. She said, do I like living there? And I said, well, that depends on you. Right? So we look at the beech leaves. They're smiling. He goes, and then you lie blissfully without a thought in your head on the ground for a half or perhaps a whole hour. You You stand up again and continue walking through the whole sweet, hot melody of blue and green spread all around. The green is so succulent and lush that you feel it as a flood in which you wade, bathe, wallow. Right? So then after he's got this description of the illusory nature of the world that he joyfully experiences, now comes the slow walking, the enjoyment of the mountaintop, the enjoyment of being here in the life. We just saw the joy that's there. And he walks it slowly. Now, I did remember from having read Gross once upon a time that he wrote something about slowness that I thought was interesting. And when we think about the richness, the kind of, even though Robert is using words like blue and green and beautiful, he's just using these fairly simple words, but there's something about the rhythm that he uses them, something about the repetition, something about the scene that he's painting for us that it's like he says, you're wading in it, or like he said before, you're drowning in it, in a manner of speaking. But there's something about this slowness in particular. So he's moving slowly through it. You take a nap for a while. Do you know what I mean? This is like that goalless goal. You just kind of lie down, and maybe it's a half hour, maybe it's an hour, and you get up and you slowly move on again. That slow is so important because it's not going anywhere. Frederick Gross said this about slowness. He said, slowness means cleaving perfectly to time. And I will say that Gross actually opposes slowness not with speed, but with haste, with speeding through something to get to some point. So, but talking about slowness, he says slowness means cleaving perfectly to time, so closely that the seconds fall one by one, drop by drop, like the steady dripping of a tap on the stone. This stretching of time depends on space. It is one of the secrets of walking, a slow approach to landscapes that gradually renders them familiar, like the regular encounters that deepen friendship, right? And this is what you're going to see. Walser is going to almost talk about it exactly that same way, but there's that slowness that, do you know what he's talking about? It makes, what does he say? Approaching landscape slowly, gradually renders them familiar. And he's talking about walking around in the mountains. He said if you drive or fly into the mountains, they move. But if you're walking in the mountains, they don't have that quality to them. Instead, there's just this landscape that's always unfolding, opening itself up to you. And you become more familiar with the mountain by moving through that way. Bo had talked last week, I had the same experience about moving around in the Twin Cities. And I first owned a car, I can't believe it's been this long now, but it's 20 years ago. So I'm 62. So I was kind of older when I first got a car. So before that, I just walked, bicycled, and used mass transit everywhere that I went. And you see a different city. I would talk to people about my day, and they'd be like, where do you see that stuff? And I said, just walking around. That's where I see it. And then I realized when I started driving, you get in that little bubble of the car, and that's it. And maybe the traffic, and that's it. And you lose out on that walking. But that's that familiarity that you get by just slowly moving through a landscape. Walser goes on, he says, it is a reveling. Right? What this description of what he was just talking about, moving about it, slowly moving about in that mountaintop and just wading in this, the whole world that's showing up as this glade, this little mountaintop that's surrounded by trees. It's the whole world, it's the whole summer, it's the whole morning. He says it's a reveling, a walking, wreathed in pleasure, a pleasurable stroll in Arcadia. Greece is no more noble and beautiful, Japan, with its princely gardens, could be no more inundated with pleasure and joy. Right here. It's right here. Whatever you can imagine, right? It's right here if you can open up to it and realize it. So, it doesn't matter. You can think of the beauty of Arcadia. He brings up that, which was an actual part of Greece that then just became the stand-in for the beauty of nature and that relationship that we have with nature. Arcadia and Japan, with its stunning, we know the ink paintings, its stunning landscapes. So Walser goes on, he says, gently and softly, the distant sounds of busy daily life rise up from the depths of the populated plains to your listening ear, while your eyes drink in the blindingly beautiful dear white of a cloud floating in the blue sky like a fairy tale ship, right? And I really like this because he's reminding us the sounds of daily life are still there, right? This isn't separate from daily life, what he's experiencing. They're still there. Those sounds. And the thing about sounds is, right, they're just there. A sound happens. Unlike, for example, when he says your eyes are drinking in the beautiful dear white of a cloud, well, there you're. Now, sight does have things that kind of bound into it, but you can control your sight a little bit more, right? A sound, it's just happening all the time, right? So that daily life, you can't, it's just there. That's the sounds that are arising as you're looking at the cloud. As you're realizing, because remember that cloud is like a fairy tale ship, reminding yourself of, the illusory nature of all this. It's still there. It's still alive. It's still doing what it does. Sweet cooing and roaring, sweet humming and whispering airs, and there you stand, under all that light, in all that light, among all those colors, and you look across to the nearby mountains reaching up into the air silently, big and shrouded in mist, like figures in a dream, and you greet them like friends. You are their friends. They are your friends. You are the whole world's friend. You want to fall into its arms, the arms of this wonderful friend. She holds you in her arms, and you hold her. You understand her. You love her, and she you. Wow! I mean, that's pretty great stuff. And that's what Gross was talking about with when we walk slowly through the landscape, it becomes more familiar. He says it's like regular encounters that deepen friendship. That's what Walser's talking about. If you realize this, you realize the whole world is your friend. And she's your friend and you're her friend. Right? That beautiful image at the end. You want to fall into its arms. The arms of this wonderful friend. She holds you in her arms and you hold her. That is intimacy. That is the intimacy of insight, of waking up. That is the compassion of wisdom, of waking up. Right? And that is, again, right there as our daily life. It is accessible to us. It's just, we just walk slowly. Enjoy those summer walks. Pay attention to them. See how they unfold. Sit on your cushion. Pay attention. See how the sitting unfolds. Right? This is it. This is where we are. This is your friend. And your friend, you realize, is already cradling you in her arms, and you cradling her. So I hope you like that story as much as I did. And that you do get out if you can, at least in the capacity that you can. I know this can be a difficult thing for some people. Right? I was in New York recently with a friend of mine, and he got injured at some point when he was younger, And now he kind of hobbles around a little bit, right? So walking's a little difficulty. But as he said when he was doing it, he said, my physical therapist says, lotion is motion. Lotion is motion. Just keep moving, right? So whatever you can do, the best you can do, that's all we can do. But be there, realize that mountaintop, that summit is there in whatever it is. So I don't know if anyone has anything else they'd like to share at this moment. Talk about the summer they've been having. Talk about the solstice, Father's Day. Yeah, Annie.
The slowness was interesting to hear about. I move really slow. That's like my natural speed.
Yeah.
And I was surprised when I first started going to Zen centers where there was a lot of speed. I felt like eating oryoki fast, people washing dishes quickly. And then I'd see some monks come from Japan and even more just so focused. They could roll a tarp up perfectly and just so quickly. It was the opposite of what I was expecting. I was expecting peace, slowness, but it was inspiring too to see it wasn't rushing. It was an attentiveness and care for others and care for their time. Yeah. And I've also just always really struggled to keep that kind of pace. So just wonder, I don't even know what my question is, but just that, moving slowness as a way of paying attention and speed as a way of paying attention.
Yeah, I think there can be slowness in speed. I think that's why that philosopher didn't oppose speed and slowness. He opposed haste and slowness. So slowness, just to use his definition, and I like it, slowness is that intimate expression of an experience of time, rather than going in slow motion. It can be going in slow motion. When we imagine Walser walking slowly on that mountaintop, he probably wasn't sprinting from one end to the other and having a slow experience. But the way that Gross describes slowness, and again, it could be a pace, but I think it's more of this. He says slowness means cleaving perfectly to time. So I think when you think about that, the master you saw from Japan, and you saw other people in Zen going fast, yeah, you do some things quickly, but we don't do them hastily. And haste is that, you said something else, rushing through it or something like that. Yeah, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, so slowness is he says, slowness means cleaving perfectly to time so closely that seconds fall one by one, drop by drop. And that can happen like that. It's just we're not rushing through it. We're not trying to get, even if the idea is eat your meal. And maybe it's eat your meal and you get 3 minutes. You know what I mean? But it's like going to the summit of Eagle Mountain. I think my husband and I, that was the walk we went on, but if we didn't get to the summit of Eagle Mountain, it wasn't such a big deal. Right? So the 3-minute thing, that's not so much, we go, oh my God, I gotta, do that. But if we're just eating quickly, the way I think oryoki sort of works like that, when you're doing oryoki, it's the whole world. You can easily get caught up in your own little eating. But you're taking care of the whole room. So you can do the opposite. I've seen people do this, where they're like, I've read Thich Nhat Hanh, and he's got some exercises that sound like they're about being pokey, the pokey little puppy. Like eating an orange slice where you're really slow. When you're doing oryoki and you've got a bowl and it has, 6 slices of orange in it, and that's just one of your 3 bowls, and you're going to take that and go, you know what I mean? You're going to be holding up the entire room is going to be sitting there waiting for you, unless the teacher finally says, finish eating, But that's not going slow either. There's something else going on there as well. I think. At least this slowness that I like, which is really just cleaving perfectly to time. It's not making something out of it, but it's not trying to beat it in some way. Yeah. So I appreciate your sharing that. Yeah. Anything else you want to say?
Oh, no, just the, matching time. It could appear slow, it could appear quick,
Yeah.
but it's just tuning in to what.
Yeah,
what the
exactly.
moment is.
Yeah, it's making something out of it and then doing whatever we do with it. So, yeah, that's great. Anything else people want to share? That moose experience was pretty incredible. You know, there were those two young hikers. They were right behind Todd and I. And they were that was their first day training. They're going to go backpacking out in Washington State. And so they were kind of getting ready for that. And the other guy said, we weren't on the trail for 100 meters. We were, danger of being trampled by a moose. They were really excited by that. They didn't see it. They were actually around the corner. So they kind of caught up to us when we were backing away, and we just said, don't go too fast. I don't know what the moose is doing. But I don't know if you've seen a moose just out in the wild, but they have a lot of presence to them. So that was really a wonderful encounter. Anything else? Well, thank you.
Thank you.